In 1953, the British government detonated nuclear bombs on Australian soil. Not in the ocean, not in an uninhabited wasteland, on land where Aboriginal people were living. And they knew. They knew before they pressed the button. They knew families were out there. They knew children were walking through that desert. And they did it anyway. Then they classified everything for 30 years. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is documented. This is in the government files they tried to keep buried. And most people alive today have never heard a single word of it. The year is 1950. Britain has just tested its first nuclear weapon. The Americans have theirs. The Soviets have theirs. And Britain is desperate to prove it belongs at that table. So they call Australia. Because Australia has something Britain needs. Space. Thousands of kilometers of open desert. Far from British soil. Far from British voters. Far from anyone who could complain. Or so they thought. The site they chose was called Maralinga, a word from the local Pichinchichara people. It means thunder. The British didn't ask permission to use it. They didn't negotiate with the people whose land it was. They simply drew a line on a map, built a fence, and told Australia's government the land was now a test range. Between 1952 and 1963, Britain detonated 12 nuclear bombs on Australian soil. 12. At Maralinga, at Emu Field, at the Montebello Islands. Each explosion releasing radiation that doesn't disappear in a day, or a year, or a decade. Radiation that poisons soil, water, and the body of every living thing that passes through. But here is where the story becomes something else entirely. Before the first test, a British scientist filed an internal report. It warned that Aboriginal people were present in the test zones. It warned they moved through the area in traditional patterns that brought them directly into the blast corridors. That report was received. It was read. It was filed. And the countdown continued. There was a man called Walter McDougall. He was the Australian government's Native Patrol officer. His job was to warn Aboriginal communities to move. He was given no vehicle for months, no radio equipment, a territory the size of England to cover, and a deadline he was never going to meet. He sent letters back to Canberra warning the tests were not safe, that people were still in the zone, that the conditions were impossible. Those letters were also filed, and the countdown continued. On the 15th of October, 1953, the British detonated a bomb at Emu Field called Totem 1. The explosion sent a radioactive cloud directly over Aboriginal land. It traveled hundreds of kilometers. It passed over Wallatinna Station, where Aboriginal families were living. People reported a black mist rolling across the ground. Low, slow, silent. People walked through it because they didn't know what it was. Within days, people were sick, vomiting, skin lesions, eyes swelling shut. Elders called it the Black Mist. Children who survived it carried the effects for the rest of their lives. The British government called Totem 1 a success. They classified the health data, and they scheduled the next test. At Maralinga, the contamination was not just from the 12 major blasts. There were hundreds of smaller trials, called minor trials, which is perhaps the most dishonest phrase in the entire history of this program, because these minor trials involved scattering plutonium across the desert, burning it, detonating it with conventional explosives to see how it behaved, not to create a nuclear explosion. But the plutonium still went into the soil. It still went into the water. It still went into the bodies of the people and animals who crossed that land. 2 kilograms of plutonium were left at Maralinga after the program ended. 2 kilograms of one of the most toxic substances ever created by human beings. And the British left. They packed up their instruments. They closed their files. They flew home. And they left Australia with a poisoned desert and no explanation of what had been done to it. For 30 years, the Australian government told Aboriginal communities nothing. Families who had been displaced from their traditional lands were not told why. People who were sick were not told what they had been exposed to. Children born with abnormalities in affected communities were not connected to any cause in any official record. The silence was total and deliberate. It was a royal commission in 1984 that began to crack it open. 30 years after the first tests, Aboriginal witnesses finally sat before a government panel and testified to what they had seen. The black mist, the dead animals, the children who never recovered. The commission found that the British government had shown, and I want you to hear this clearly, a callous disregard for the safety of Aboriginal people. Not negligence, not oversight. Callous disregard. That is the language of a government inquiry. That is what they found when they finally looked. The cleanup that followed was described as inadequate within years of its completion. Plutonium was still being found at the surface. Traditional owners who returned to their land were still being told to avoid certain areas, still being told not to disturb the soil, still living with the consequences of a decision made by men in London who never once set foot in that desert. In 1994, Australia reached a compensation settlement with Britain, $45 million, split between cleanup costs and compensation to affected Aboriginal communities. The British made no formal apology. They acknowledged the settlement. They did not acknowledge the crime. Maralinga was officially handed back to the Maralinga people in 2009, 57 years after the first test, and parts of it are still contaminated. The warning signs are still there. The fencing is still there. The plutonium that was left in the soil is still there. It has a half-life of 24,000 years. 24,000 years. Let that settle. Because the people responsible for putting it there lived full lives, retired with their pensions, attended their honors ceremonies, were never charged with a single crime, and the communities they exposed are still fighting for full recognition today. This is the story that was classified, filed away, kept from the people it happened to, and from the rest of the world, and you almost certainly never heard it in a classroom, because some history is only taught when someone forces it into the light. If this is the first time you are hearing what happened at Maralinga, you need to share this video right now. Not tomorrow, right now. Because someone in your circle is going to see this and say they never knew. And that is exactly why these stories get buried. Because they count on us not talking about them. Drop a comment below and tell us one thing from this video that genuinely shocked you. And if you have a piece of history, something suppressed, something covered up, something your government hoped would be forgotten, drop it in the comments. We will find it. We will research it, and we will tell it the same way we told this one. Because there are stories we have not covered yet that are going to make this one look like a footnote. We are just getting started.